Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a great day. Time for some gear talk, some guitar talk. I don't know if y'all remember these, but I have one from the ancient time known as like the 1970s. These are curly guitar cables, and I've been seeing these make a little bit of a comeback, so I want to make a video. Should you get a curly guitar cable? Well, there's two things to consider. One is the practical nature of a curly guitar cable and what it gives you as it's the way it physically is, and the other one is tone, which I'll talk about at the end. The main one is, the convenience of this. We have to kind of wonder why they went away. These things disappeared for like years and years, and I couldn't find them. That's why I've been toting around an old one forever. This one actually needs to be repaired, which is not hard to do on old cables. Should you use a curly guitar cable? And why did they go away? Well, if you go and you look back at old like vintage videos of like Jimi Hendrix playing, you'll see that he's using like this crazy curled up guitar cable and going like into his amp or into some pedals and then into an amp. And you're like, what is going on? I don't see these anymore. Well, back in the day, you have to think a performer didn't have wireless technology and stuff. You could trip on the cables. So that's the main reason why you'd want to use a little curly cable, is that it doesn't end up coiled up on the floor where you're going to easily trip on it. It reduces the amount of coils that end up on the floor. It stretches longer as you walk away from where you're plugged into, and it gets shorter as you get closer. So it keeps, even one that's really long and has a lot of coils, it keeps most of it off the floor. You don't end up with big things that you can like a loop that you can stick your foot into and trip on and fall over, or pull the cable out of your guitar, or any stuff like that. So it gets rid of a lot of that practical annoyance of having a cable that's running on the floor, which you can trip over. It looks maybe a little weird because you have like a cable suspended from your guitar, and there's an impracticality to that too, which is that you have basically a bungee cord on you, so you're like, there's tension when you're walking away from wherever you're plugged into. But it does get rid of the mucky muck on the floor, and that's exactly what I'm going to use this cable for after I repair it. Is I'm going to use it to go from me to the pedal board in my setups here, and maybe as I go somewhere else, because it's a long enough cable to do a lot of things with. One of the things that happens with straight cables, in particular for me, is even if I'm standing still, if I'm not walking around on a stage, it'll get caught up in pedals. So having one that goes to your pedal board can be really advantageous. Let me grab a straight cable here. If I have a straight cable here, what happens sometimes is that I'm physically moved, like I come over here to play like a piano part or something, and then I come back and my cable shifts a little bit because I never put my guitar down, and then you end up with a loop that comes into the, and then, you can't use your pedal. It gets stuck on the pedal. Maybe you can't turn off your wah all of a sudden because a cable got looped underneath an edge like that. Or you can't roll the volume off because there's a loop of cable that gets under the back. So having that coiled up cable where it's always going in a straight line, curved because there's weight to it, but a straight line between you and the pedal board gets rid of that. So I do need to repair it, but that's my plan on using it, and maybe you'll have a similar use for practice or something like that. Here's a question: do professionals use curly cables, and why did they stop using them? Well, they don't use them because they use wireless systems, at least when they play live. They may use curly cable for practice for some of the reasons that I mentioned, but they're not going to be using it live. They're going to be using wireless now. One of the reasons that I think these disappeared for like 3 decades almost is performers changed the way that they were performing. It used to be you were plugged into your amp and your amp was like really close to you, like right there, or you were plugged into pedals and they were going to the amp and you were really close to your pedal board all the time. But musical acts evolved, especially rock music. Stages got bigger, stage setups got more complex. And as a result, you were further away from your amp. So you would use, instead of curly cables, you'd run straight cables, either from your pedal board to your amp, or, you'd be having a wireless that would go over to the amp. So you could have a much bigger stage and move around much more on stage, gave you a lot more freedom. And wireless had the practicality of getting rid of tripping over cables or pulling them out of your guitar and stuff like that. There's still plenty of players that plug directly in, including great players, and there's still plenty of acts you'd see well into the 90s of guitar players still plugging straight in. So it's not like people completely abandon it and use wireless, but nowadays wireless is so easy to get, and it's so cheap in a lot of cases that just everybody ends up using wireless because of the practical implications of it, which will have something to do with the other reason that people get these or avoid these, which is tone. You may hear people say that the curly thing changes your tone. Actually, before I get to the tone, one more practical thing. These never get tangled, right? You can always just pull them out of your case and then they're just straight. They never get tangled. You never have to worry about doing the perfect wind and throwing out the thing. Oh, and then there's a loop and you put two wires next to each other and then they magically get tangled. That doesn't happen with the curly guitar cable. It just will always be untangled for you forever. They're magical. They're great for that reason. So if you're tired of your cables getting tangled up, your patch cable getting tangled up with your friends or getting tangled, just get a curly guitar cable, and that will get rid of that annoyance. Anyway, tone. Do these change your tone? Potentially, yes. There's a kernel of truth in the statement that people make that these change your tone either for the good or the bad. And the reason doesn't have anything to do with the shape. Like the curliness of the cable does not alter your sound at all. What does alter the sound is the sheer amount of cable you have between your guitar and whatever you're plugged into. The fact is, the longer your signal chain, the more the signal gets degraded. And because it's an analog signal, you're not getting static or something. You start to lose higher frequencies. They're the ones that tend to disappear first. Some people like this, they're maybe playing vintage single coil pickups and they're really bright. And so they like the fact that the curly guitar cable supposedly rolls off the high end just a little bit. But I don't like that. I want maximum. I don't want to lose an iota of tone. I can always turn the bright off on the Fender amp, or I can turn down the treble on the amp a little bit, right? Or run an EQ or something like that, or dial the tone knob on your guitar. They're there. They work better with active pickups than passive pickups, but you can dial the tone knob off just a hair and it'll have the same effect. The problem with losing high end is that once it's gone, it's hard to put it back in. You can turn the high end back up, but you will lose the details. And most of the details, if you're playing the articulation, most of the tone is in the upper registers. It's in those higher frequencies. So you can't put back frequencies which have just disappeared from the signal chain. All you can do is amplify some of the frequencies around that to have a sense of treble happening. But what you won't have is the ability to gain back those really fine details. So I say you don't want to roll the tone off. But how much do these roll the tone off? And the answer is really not very much in my experience. It's negligible if it's there at all. I think the degree to which long cables will destroy or suck your tone is a little bit overrated by some players. I think the audience doesn't notice, and I think a lot of modern players that are just running a lot of effects and a lot of different EQs are just not going to notice that. They're not going to notice that signal loss. It's not like they're running directly into a jazz chorus with nothing in between and no effects, and they have like really precise hearing and you're only hearing the guitar, nothing else. There's no mix to hear, it's just solo guitar. Maybe then you might notice a slight loss of treble, but it's going to be really hard to notice in my opinion. And the reason that these have longer cables is they're curled up, right? So even though this is 6 feet, it's like 6 feet, it's actually like 12 or 15 feet worth of cable. So there's ones that are 30 feet worth of cable. That 30 feet worth of cable all coiled up here into the coiled, the curly guitar cable, that will degrade your signal a little bit. I don't think it will degrade it even with passive pickups enough for you to think that it sucked your tone or something like that. That's just, you can test it out. I could try to, you're not going to hear the difference on YouTube. From my experimentation with it, it's like, there's no way it would come across on YouTube. It would be like 1% difference or less, especially with something like this, which is not a whole lot of cable. And I don't have like a 40, 50 foot curly guitar cable to, do an A/B test on it. But in my opinion, I don't think you need to worry that much about it. And if you're using active pickups, you don't need to worry about it at all. And that's because active pickups run at a much lower impedance. A regular passive guitar pickup is running at 250k ohms. Some people use 500k ohm pots, but that's not necessarily the impedance of the signal. Whereas active pickups run at 25K, it's like 10 times less impedance. That doesn't mean it's loud or anything. It just means that as you're going through a lot more wire, you tend to lose less signal with the active pickups. But like I said, active versus passive, that's a whole nother video. A lot of modern players would say it just doesn't matter because you're running through a wireless anyway. So the benefits that you have from the lower impedance just are not that significant. And I tend to agree with that. So yes, curly guitar cables, they are awesome. I don't believe they will suck your tone in enough for anyone to notice. And they do have a lot of practical benefits, and you can get them from all kinds of different manufacturers for fairly cheap or for fairly expensive if you want to buy the name brand Fender one. Another thing that's cool about these older cables, by the way, is that I mentioned this is broken. It's really easy to repair. You can take this off. If you ever cut up your cable, you can always cut it and then resolder the tip back on. It's really easy to do. It's not a hard operation to do. You can, I'm sure, look up a tutorial on YouTube. That's a great thing about these older cables too, is that they're really easy to repair if you muck them up. The actual quality of the cable in them is quite high. So they're, when you repair them, you get really no loss of anything that you could think of. So anyway, I guess that's it. The only other disadvantage I could think to them is that with that longer cable comes maybe a little bit of an increase in electromagnetic interference, which I have to deal with a lot where I'm at right now. But I think it's just the same as running lots of other cables, right? And you're probably going to get more interference from places that aren't shielded than you are from a shielded cable that happens to be a little bit longer than other cables. So anyway, I'm going to use this to go into my first part of my signal chain, and you let me know what you think about curly guitar cables. I always liked using these back in the day, but they were really hard to find. They stopped selling them in stores for a long time. It's cool to see them back. So let me know what you think, and I'll see you all next time. Have a great one.